He had walked farther across Antarctica than any human being alive. He was 30 miles from the finish line. And then, alone, frostbitten, and bleeding internally, he made a decision that would end everything. There is a specific kind of madness that looks, from the outside, exactly like discipline. Henry Worsley had it his whole life, and the people who loved him knew it. They just never found the right word for it until Antarctica. He was born in 1960, raised in the quiet corners of English countryside, the kind of upbringing that produces men who are more comfortable with silence than conversation. He joined the British Army young, rose through the ranks, became a lieutenant colonel, served in the Falklands, in Northern Ireland, in places where the difference between a good decision and a catastrophic one was measured in seconds. He was not the loudest man in any room he entered. He was the one you watched, the one who, when things got difficult, became more still rather than more frantic. That stillness was his gift. It was also, eventually, his undoing. But the dream, the one that would consume the final years of his life, did not begin with him. It began with Ernest Shackleton. Most people know the name, fewer know the full shape of the failure. In 1914, Shackleton set out to do what no human being had ever done: cross the Antarctic continent entirely on foot, from one coast to the other, through the South Pole. The journey was roughly 1,800 miles through the most brutal environment on Earth. He never made it. His ship, the Endurance, was crushed by pack ice before he even set foot on the continent. What followed was one of history's great survival stories, but the crossing itself, the original dream, remained unfinished. For nearly a century it waited. Henry Worsley grew up reading about Shackleton, not casually, deeply, the kind of reading where you put the book down and sit with it. He was descended, distantly, from Frank Worsley, the navigator who sailed with Shackleton, whose skill kept men alive when luck alone could not. Henry carried that name like a quiet inheritance. He didn't talk about it often, but it shaped him in ways that don't show on the surface. In 2008, he finally did something about it. He co-led an expedition to complete what Shackleton never could. The team succeeded. They crossed Antarctica, reached the South Pole, finished the route. By any measure, it was a remarkable achievement. For most men, it would have been enough: a conclusion, a box ticked, a story to tell grandchildren. For Henry Worsley, it felt like a prologue. Because he hadn't done it alone, and somewhere in the back of his mind, quiet, patient, the way a serious idea tends to be, the thought was already forming. What if no team? What if no resupply drops? What if one man, pulling a sledge, carrying everything he needed, covering the full distance on foot, completely unsupported, entirely alone? No one had ever done it, not once, not even close. He told his wife, Joanna. She listened. She knew better than to argue with that particular look in his eye. His son, Max, his daughter, Alicia, they knew too. This was not a hobby. This was something that had already been decided at a level below language. He began training in 2014. He was 54 years old, and he was going to walk across Antarctica alone, from coast to coast, through the South Pole, without assistance from another living soul. What he did not know, what no amount of preparation could have told him, was what the ice was going to do to his body and his mind and the thin, stubborn thread of will that connected them. He would find out soon enough, but first The ice had to introduce itself properly. He would find out soon enough. But first, the ice had to introduce itself properly. Antarctica is not a place that tolerates metaphor. You can call it a wasteland, a wilderness, a cathedral of silence, and all of those things are technically true, but none of them prepare you for standing on it. The cold there is not the cold you know. It is not the cold of a winter morning or a freezer door left open. It is a cold that has intent. It finds the gaps in your clothing, the unguarded inch of skin, the moment of inattention. It works methodically, the way water finds cracks in stone, slowly, thoroughly, without mercy. Henry Worsley stepped onto the Ronne ice shelf on November 13, 2015, the starting point of Shackleton's original route. He was pulling a sledge that weighed, at departure, approximately 130 kilograms. That is roughly the weight of a large man. He was going to drag it across 1,500 miles of ice using nothing but his own body. He kept a journal. He recorded daily audio diaries that were shared publicly as he walked. This is important because it means we know, not from second-hand accounts, not from reconstruction, but in his own words, what happened to him out there, day by day, mile by mile. The early entries are measured, almost businesslike. Conditions, distance, weather. He was covering between 12 and 17 miles a day in the beginning, which is extraordinary given the weight he was pulling. He moved with efficiency. He had trained for this. He knew what he was doing. Antarctica disagreed. By week 3, the sastrugi began. Sastrugi are ridges of hardened snow, carved by wind into irregular formations that run parallel across the ice. They are not large individually, but crossing miles of them day after day, dragging 130 kilograms, wearing boots so heavy they register as weight training by themselves. It is the kind of sustained punishment that accumulates silently. Your hips take it first, then your lower back. Your feet develop blisters, then the blisters tear, then the skin beneath hardens, then that tears too. His entries began to change tone. Not dramatically. Henry Worsley was not a dramatic man. But the gaps between observations widened. The sentences became shorter. There was a flatness creeping into his language that anyone who has been truly exhausted will recognize. Not despair, something quieter than despair. The mechanical persistence of a man who has decided that stopping is simply not on the list of available options. He passed the halfway point, then the 2/3 mark. He reached the South Pole on January 3, 2016, becoming the first person to have crossed the South Pole both as part of a team and alone, unsupported. He took a photograph. He barely mentioned the milestone in his diary. He had 400 miles still to walk. He pushed on. And that is when the continent stopped being merely brutal and started being something else. His body, which had been sending quiet distress signals for weeks, began to escalate. He was losing weight at a rate his caloric intake could not offset. His shoulder, damaged years earlier, began to fail under the constant pressure of the harness. He developed what he described as a deep, grinding discomfort in his abdomen, the kind of pain that sits still and waits rather than shouts, a patient pain, the worst kind. He kept walking. By mid-January, he had covered more distance, unsupported, alone, than any human being in recorded history. He had surpassed every prior record. He was 30 miles from the coast. 30 miles from becoming the first person to ever complete this crossing alone, without help, without resupply. 30 miles. On any other surface, in any other condition, that is a single day's walk. But what Worsley had inside him by that point was not something maps could measure, and it was about to make itself impossible to ignore. January 22nd, 2016. He had been on the ice for 71 days. That morning, Henry Worsley stopped walking, not because of weather, not because his equipment failed. He stopped because his body, after weeks of signals he had interpreted as manageable, issued a final notice that could not be reframed or pushed through. He was bleeding internally. His abdomen was distended. He was severely dehydrated despite consuming every drop of water he could manage. He had lost approximately 23 kilograms of body weight, nearly a quarter of his starting mass. His organs were beginning to register the kind of stress that doesn't repair itself on the trail. He set up his tent. He sat with it for a while. Then he picked up his satellite phone and called his wife, Joanna. We know what he said because she has spoken about it carefully in the years since. He told her he was done. He told her he had nothing left. He told her he was proud of what he had achieved and sorry that he hadn't made it to the end. He told her he loved her. And then, because this is the kind of man he was, he activated his emergency beacon himself. He did not wait to be talked out of it. He did not call the extraction team hoping to be persuaded to continue. He made the decision clearly, stated it plainly, and acted on it. That took more courage than any of the previous 71 days. The rescue operation was not simple. Antarctica is not a place where helicopters appear in 20 minutes. Logistics had to be assembled across thousands of miles. A Chilean military aircraft was eventually coordinated. A team was deployed. It took time. During that time, Worsley lay in his tent on the ice, 30 miles from what would have been the end of everything he had worked toward, and waited. He was airlifted to Punta Arenas, Chile, admitted to hospital. Initial assessments confirmed what his body had been communicating for weeks: bacterial peritonitis, an infection of the abdominal cavity, caused by a perforated organ. It is the kind of condition that, left untreated even hours longer, becomes fatal with certainty. He underwent emergency surgery. Joanna flew to Chile. His children waited. People who had been following his daily audio diaries, thousands of them across the world, went quiet, checking their phones, waiting for updates that came slowly. For a brief window, the reports were cautiously hopeful. He had survived the surgery. He was in intensive care. He was stable. And then he wasn't. What happened next in that hospital room in Chile is the part of this story that most people are not prepared for. Because Henry Worsley had survived 71 days alone on the most hostile terrain on Earth, and what finally stopped him was not the ice. Henry Worsley died on January 24, 2016, 2 days after his rescue. Complications following surgery. He was 55 years old. The world, which had spent 71 days following him across the most hostile terrain on Earth, went very still. He came 30 miles short of the finish line. Depending on how you hold that fact, it is either a failure or the most extraordinary thing a human being has ever done on foot. He raised over 100,000 pounds for wounded servicemen. He walked farther, alone and unsupported, than any person in recorded history. He broke every record available to him, and then, when his body issued a demand that could not be pushed through, he made the call himself. That is the detail that endures, not the distance, not the death, the decision, made clearly, made freely, by a man who understood exactly what it meant. Antarctica does not give you glory. It gives you exactly what you bring to it, and no more. Henry Worsley brought everything he had. He left nothing behind. Just a man, an ice shelf, a satellite phone, and 30 miles that will never be walked. 71 days, 913 miles, one man, no assistance, no resupply, no one to call, until there was nothing left to give.